911. What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my sensor light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man or something that looks like a man. I don't know what it was, just that it ran across the yard.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Deal!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Okay, hang on.
He's right...
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Okay.
You're listening to Sasquatch Experience, the podcast. The classic Bigfoot podcast has returned with Sean Forker and Henry May. The show starts now. And good evening, good morning, good afternoon, or good night. You're listening to the Sasquatch Experience, the podcast. The Bigfoot podcasting classic has returned with me, Sean the Fork Chop Forker, Henry May, Vance Nesbitt, and tonight we have a special guest with us, a longtime friend and an established researcher, a veteran Bigfoot researcher, and also a veteran, Mr. Todd Neiss. Todd, thanks for joining us tonight, my friend. It's glad to have you.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Henry, Vance, guys, it's been a while since you two have been on together. How you both doing?
Oh, doing good.
Yeah, I'm doing good, considering the fact that I think my first question up on the template here is, Sasquatch immune from COVID-19, or does he wear a mask, keep 6 foot? I don't know.
He just has to lay down for social distancing, you know?
True.
So that's how it's been. Yeah, we all know the world's a little different than it was months ago when we sat down to the last podcast. The thing is, we can't change that, right? All we can do is move forward and truck on and provide folks with a great source of entertainment as we go through this trial and tribulous times. And if we can add a little levity to it, well, why the heck not? And that's the best part of what we do, taking a serious approach to a subject, but still having a little bit of fun with it, right, guys? Because this is a serious topic. You know, we're talking about an undiscovered species of primate in North America. I know other people's thoughts may differ, whether it's human or whatever. That's not my belief. You feel free to believe what you want. Some people also think this thing uses wormholes. I do not. What I think is that we do have a species of undocumented North American primate. That's the position I take. And because I run the show, that's how we look at it. It's great to be the boss. So we talk to people that really feel kind of the way we do. And eventually we may talk to some people on the fringe if they are competent enough and articulate enough to talk about and frame their conversation, because I think that's where they lose it. But guys, we have a real good flesh and blood researcher with us tonight, Mr. Todd Neiss, a retired sergeant from the United States military, and he had an interesting encounter of his own April 3rd, 1993, which he'll share with us here in a little bit. But since that encounter, he's been an active participant in the search and eventually formed the American Primate Conservancy with his wife, Diane Stocking, a good friend of mine and a longtime researcher as well. And you can find out a little bit more about them collectively, AmericanPrimate.org. But as we kick this off, Todd, as I said there in the brief little blurb, you had a sighting. And from what I've gathered from the research I've done and knowing you in the past, you were a pretty... Bigfoot wasn't on your radar before that, right?
Not at all, no. I kind of considered myself somewhat agnostic, if you will. I really didn't have an opinion. I had assumed that it fell in the same category as, the boogeyman or, a great little campfire story to get kids riled up around the campfire. But I really didn't put any credence in it. Didn't read any of the books on the subject, watched the TV programs on the subject. It just wasn't, growing up here in the Pacific Northwest, you cannot help but hear about the quote-unquote legendary beast, but just really wasn't something I was interested in at the time at all.
No, right? And like you said, you grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so you always had to have had a little kind of idea of what the Bigfoot creature was around. Do you remember seeing the Patterson-Gimlin film originally around its debut time, being from that region?
I do. In fact, I remember clearly my father had taken me to the Westgate Theater in Beaverton, Oregon. It's a southwest suburb of Portland. I do remember that pretty clearly, yes.
And seeing it for the first time, Todd, did you have any thoughts, or did it make any kind of lasting impressions of you? Maybe not then, but now where you're at in this research and when it was kind of kindled for you, did you go back to the Patterson film and say, man, this is, I knew about it all along?
Well, I've certainly accessed the Patterson footage countless times, but I really didn't draw any sort of a correlation between that and having seen the movie back in, I want to say it was 69 or 70, but let's just say I have a lot more respect for it than I did back then.
Absolutely. How could you not, really? So you're out on drill, correct, in 1993. Tell us a little bit about your encounter, Todd.
So in 93, I had been a combat engineer with the Oregon Army National Guard. At that time, about 4 years. And as a combat engineer, a good deal of what we deal with is explosives, and talking lots of high-powered explosives. Now, although we had a blasting area on the base there at Camp Rylea, in order to do the larger charges that are more realistic to wartime situations, we would get special access to some private timberland, not far from Camp Rylea, maybe 15 miles or so. And so this had been probably the third or fourth time I'd been in there doing this. And it's always fun to get to play with a couple 100 pounds of ammonium nitrate or C4 plastic explosive, to get to experience it in a more of a realistic setting. And as per standard operating procedure, we would have designated, these are gravel quarries that the timber company would use to gravel roads that they had punched into new areas. And they're perfect for what we did. No real chance of starting a fire, and it's all pretty well contained. That particular day, we had 3 different sites. Doing cutting charges at the first site, which is like using C4 to blow steel beams in half, simulating like if you're going to take out a bridge or something. At the second site, we had a mock minefield, and a lot of what we do is mobility, counter-mobility. Our job is we'll either put in that minefield or we at least blast the lane through it for our troops to get through. And finally, the third site, these are located within a couple miles of each other. We had a cratering charge, about 250 pounds of ammonium nitrate we'd been soaking in diesel fuel for a while. And everything had gone, pretty standard. This was to be our last explosion of the day, and we set the fuses on that particular blast, and then we just get in the vehicles. I think we had about 11-minute fuse. Again, standard operating procedure. We get in the vehicles, we convoy out of there, obviously, and get to a safety staging area where we would wait for the explosion and then go back and check our work. And this particular exercise, we had 2 Humvees leading the pack. There were 4 vehicles total. I was in the second Humvee as a passenger sitting behind the driver. Behind me was a covered troop transport, we call a deuce and a half. And then finally taking up the rear was the commander in his Humvee. Are heading away from this bomb that we've got cooking off behind us, and we started to take this very shallow turn to the right, and in doing so, the taller trees would clear away. We had some what they call reprod between us and the second site, and we could see the second site clearly from where we were at. And this was a clear day, about 3 in the afternoon, and it was actually nice enough. I had my window unzipped, and I was just kind of glancing about the countryside looking for, wildlife. I hunted deer and elk in that area. And as we came around that corner and that second site came into view, what I saw were not animals per se, or certainly nothing like I'd ever seen. What I saw were 3 very distinct black creatures, if you will. They were facing us, kind of standing in a row, facing our direction, watching us, obviously observing us, and I'm sure they had tied us to the detonations that were going on. In fact, they were at that second pit. We had detonated a couple hundred pounds of C4, probably just an hour before that, and rather than leave the area, they actually came in to investigate. And as I'm looking at these things, initially there's kind of a process of denial. It can't be what I'm seeing, but again, you can't unsee what you're seeing either. In fact, I can see it as clearly as we were yesterday. But what really stood out, other than they were standing on 2 legs, was their physique. For one, they were built like all 3 like bodybuilders, the one in the middle being taller than the other 2, and I would estimate the middle one to be about 9 feet in height. Very huge, very muscular. And the second thing that, cinched it for me was that while that one in the middle would stand there rock steady like a statue, the 2 on either side of it exhibited this swaying, if you will, rocking back and forth, shifting weight from left foot to right foot and back. And in the process, these long arms, they came down halfway between the knee and the ankle on these things. These long arms would just swing like pendulums in front of their knees. And I was just stunned, shocked. It's hard to explain, but I mean, you go through a rapid fire range of emotions, and this sighting was not 1 or 2 seconds something stepped across the road in front of the vehicle. This was, as we talked about yesterday, this was a full 25 seconds, I would estimate, that we had visual on these things, or I did anyway. And after 25 seconds had expired, we rounded another corner, and that's when I lost sight of them. And at that point, I just kind of slumped back in my seat and tried to take it all in, tried to process what I just saw, try to make sense of it, And
oh yeah,
we continued on another few minutes to the staging area where we got out of our vehicles, and I don't know what I was thinking. I guess I was hoping I could get another view of them if I ran back toward where we had come from. But we have a standing policy for safety reasons that nobody is unaccounted for. And for me to go far enough to see these things, I would have been out of sight, and that would have been a big taboo. So I went as far as I dared, and I'm standing there on my tiptoes trying to see over this little knoll, if you will, frustrated that I could not quite get what I was trying to see. And that's when things got a little stranger yet. As I'm standing there with my hand to my forehead, and I'm trying to get any sort of a glimpse of these things, I hear somebody yell my name, and it was Sergeant Martin. He just said, "Hey, Neiss, what you looking at?" And at that, I dropped my arms to my side. I go, "Oh, nothing." And he kept walking up to me, and he's smoking on a cigarette, and he goes, kind of looked around, make sure nobody else was in earshot, and he said, I don't suppose you saw what I saw down at the second blast site. And no, wanting to be the fool, I said, I don't know, Jeff, what did you see? And that's when he went on to describe virtually what I had seen. He said, I saw 3 giant hair-covered, I don't know, Bigfoot, I guess. And of course, at that, I'm like, well, yeah, I did too, And it was nice to have that corroboration, but I'll tell you, I certainly didn't need it, but it was comforting to know that I wasn't the only one that it saw him. And as it was being in the National Guard, drilling 1 weekend a month, that next month in May when we met up, 2 more soldiers came forward and admitted to seeing the same thing, and they were independent of each other. So this sighting's unique in a number of ways, not the least of which what we were doing up there, blowing up the forest. But this is a very serious, sober activity we're engaged in. You've got soldiers doing this. Multiple animal sightings are rare. Multiple eyewitnesses and multiple creatures combined with explosions. This makes it kind of unique, I think. I'm glad other people saw them. And if 4 people came forward, it makes you wonder how many actually saw something and never did.
Todd, I have a question for you. Just real quick, which isn't really related to the creatures themselves, but regarding the ordnance that was being detonated. Mm-hmm. Was any of that designed to have any shrapnel throw? Or was it just whatever debris may be where that ordnance was detonated at?
That's a good question. Nobody's asked me that. But at that second site, there was a team that went up ahead of us and prepped the site. At this particular site, at this quarry the one that I had saw them in, they had put up at the back end of the minefield, if you will, the farthest away from us, triple concertina wire obstacle. You've probably seen them before. Razor wire. They spool them out, stake them down, and once you get 2 next to each other, you stack a third on top. And trust me, believe it or not, it's not just anti-personnel. I've seen it stop a tank. Just the way the wiring gets tangled up and everything. Then there was the minefield itself, which were training mines, not functioning, no ordnance in the mines, but just the shell casings. But the final thing we did is once we got everything tied in, I should say on the concertina wire, I don't know if you know what a Bangalore torpedo is, but it's like basically a pipe full of C4, and right. You could shove that under a fence and blow a big hole through it. In fact, they're pretty effective for clearing a route, at least for troops through a minefield. And so we had done a kind of a field expedient, Bangalore's under the fence. That tied into the ring main to the other charges that we had placed next to the mines. And then we snaked the det cord back to this little mound of dirt, and I don't know if it was on the training schedule or not, but we made a field expedient claymore mine using a number 10 coffee can, a standard metal coffee can. What we did is we kind of dug a little hole in the side of this hill facing the minefield, poked a hole in the bottom of the can, ran a blasting cap in there, put some C4 in there, some wadding, and then we filled it with rocks and bolts and other kinds of shrapnel. So that when this whole thing detonated, det cord burned so fast you'd never even see any sequence of events. Anything attached to it just goes up immediately. So, yeah, I guess to answer your question, it was basically the fence would blow in half, the mines would blow up, and this claymore would shoot out laterally across that minefield all simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just curious to the fact that, maybe one of these creatures took injury from the blasts, and it was a curiosity from that, not so much maybe the noise, but maybe there was a little seeking of curiosity or revenge or who knows what, if there was injury inflicted.
Well, and people have asked me that, and one of the things I remember in hindsight, and this I've got to keep in mind, this is before I actually saw the creatures. We were still at that second rock quarry, and we were attaching blocks of C4 in to the main ring main. We had two different squads, and I was a squad leader for this one ring main. And when we're out there, we practice as we train as we fight. And one of the things is noise discipline. You got trash discipline, noise discipline, light discipline, all that. You have to assume the enemy's in the area, and you act that way. So I'm bent down, putting a 1.25 pound block of C4 next to my mine. Everybody doing their thing, and all of a sudden I heard this really loud whooping sound, like a whoop. I immediately looked up thinking it was one of my guys, and I was going to jump down their throat for violating noise discipline. But when I looked up, everybody was still busy doing their thing. Nobody was goofing off. And it kind of dawned on me that sound we heard sounded like that it came from further back into the tree line beyond that concertina obstacle. And again, I never even thought about that until after, everything had happened. But you wonder if they were in that area, if maybe they were observing us. And, like I say, once we light those fuses, we've got everything in the truck. Everybody's ready to go. We light the fuses and Mow out of there. There was, over 10 minutes time that, once they detected that we had left the area, so they could have very easily have filtered back in there. And I hope they didn't, because I watched that explosion. Actually, we had a radio tower that was having issues, and they asked me to go check it out. So I was maybe 2 miles away on this hillside where the tower was. And so I got a pretty good view when it went up. And I mean, it threw up a mushroom cloud. Looked like a miniature atomic bomb. I mean, it went up a good several thousand feet in the air, and anything in that quarry or near it wouldn't have a chance. So I don't know. It's a good question. It's one that I've thought about, but I certainly hope none of them were injured. But again, thinking about what happened while we were setting that particular explosive up, I did hear that very high-pitched whoop sound coming from the wood line. So I don't know. I really don't know.
So as of 2020, what is that area like now? Is it changed dramatically as far as the landscape is concerned?
Well, certainly the reprod has grown probably a good, that's 27 years ago. So that reprod's come, but probably standing a good 30, 40 feet high at this point. And at that, you probably wouldn't even be able to see that quarry from the vantage point I had before. I went in there regularly. Every time I went down for drill, I was fortunate enough to get my hands on a master key to the forest. It was Cavenham Forest Products. I got a master key to all their gates, and I was up there continuously. And it changed over time in the 10 or so years that I continued to go back in there. I did a lot of baiting up there. Bait disappeared every time. Tried different things, and I think they were still active up there quite a while after this particular situation.
How long has the blasting been going on after that particular event that you experienced seeing these creatures?
Let's see. I was in it back then until late 95, early 96, and I don't recall going back into that particular place. I will say in 98, I set up an expedition in that area. We were actually going to set up a base camp in the quarry. That was our initial plan. And that was with Peter Byrne and Ron Moorhead and Joe Bielart and the late Fred Bradshaw. And when we got to the quarry, they had reactivated it. They had a crusher down there, they had a guard dog down there, and a small trailer down there. So, and I don't know how far back that process had begun, but I guess to answer your question, we didn't go back to that specific area And after I got out in 96, after my first stint, I don't know whether or not they went back there or not. It had since been taken over by Willamette Industries, and I don't know if they had the same kind of contract with the military that Cavenham did. It's changed a lot. My very first expedition was actually in that very rock quarry with one other friend. We spent 7 days up there. There were still craters in the ground where those blocks of C4 were. They were just a whole bunch of water-filled puddles.
So has you or anybody else tried to reach out to anybody that may be employed at the quarry to see if they've ever had any kind of strange experience?
Well, as you can imagine, I focused on that area, the Coast Range, pretty extensively at first. That getting possession of that master key actually came to us, to me via Peter Byrne. I never could figure out how he talked the security manager into, and I asked him, I go, what'd you tell him you're doing? And he said, I told him exactly what we're doing, and that we wouldn't, leave a mess, and we'd be in and out, and you'd never know we're there. And what's funny, the guy's name was Bob Teagle. He was a head of security for this vast holding that at that time Cavenham had. So I found it interesting that Mr. Teagle would, knowing what we were doing in there, would hand over keys. But apparently when Weyerhaeuser took over and changed all the locks, well, Bob Teagle stayed on. They hired him on since he was the security manager before. So he went from Cavenham to Willamette Industries, and when they changed all the locks, he got us another master key. So it makes me wonder, for him to support that and take that chance, what he may or may not have known or suspected. But I know they ran trucks through there all the time, more so when Willamette Industries took over, because when Willamette bought it from Cavenham, they also absorbed 4 active lawsuits because Cavenham was not as security conscious, and people got in there and would drown in the river or roll over a 4-wheeler and get killed or injured, and so part of the deal was they had to take the good with the bad, but they were very Willamette especially. When I would go in there, I would always run into their security no matter where I went in there. I could be behind 3 different locked gates, and one of them would show up. They would ask me what I was doing there, and I just told them what I was told to say, and that is, take it up with your boss. Okay, they'd get on their radio, and they'd come back and say, okay, you're good.
Todd, I always found less resistance when I was honest with people about what I was doing. If you just come right out and tell them what you're doing and you're not hiding anything, I've never been told no yet about going onto a property.
Really?
Never. Nope. And I've made it seem pretty credible research and scientific, you know what I mean? I haven't said, I'm coming out here to, poke around and leave donuts out for Bigfoot. I've left it, a lot more scientific, but I've never been excluded out of there just by, like you said, just being forthright and honest with what my purpose was there to begin with.
Well, and Peter's his credentials are impeccable, and
absolutely
a very powerful character. He'll be 95 this year.
Can't believe it. Henry, did you have a question quick before we digress?
Yes. I wanted to ask Todd, do you think that the 3 that you saw were a family unit, that perhaps that was mom or dad and 2 young ones?
Well, it was only 3. Like I said, I was not close enough to make out facial features or genitalia. They struck me as all being male, though, just from their physique. And like I said, the middle one estimated at 9 feet tall, the 2 on either side, they came fully up to the shoulders of the bigger ones, and were probably 6.5, 7 feet tall themselves. So I don't know if it was a family unit, and just when you take into consideration. If you were in the woods, something traumatic like that happens, are you going to grab your infants and your adolescent and your mate and drag them in there? Or are you going to send in more of a search party or investigative party? My guess was that it was a scouting party, and that they're all male. I can't back that up, but that was the impression I got.
Now, Todd, when we talked earlier, you did say you wanted to clarify the distance. You've said in the past, there was some confusion and someone said something to you about it. You were able to get some more precise measurements about that day. Right. And I don't know why I didn't do this sooner. All I could do is guesstimate. I know enough. Whenever I was asked how far away we were, all I could do is guesstimate, and I'm sure over time. In fact, I know my numbers differed a little bit back and forth. You're talking 27 years ago. I got onto Google Earth and found the location, and was actually able, using their measuring tool, to measure the distance between the route that we were driving and that quarry. If you can walk me back through it, we did it the other day. We did a screen share, trying to find about the closest we got would probably, as far as line of sight, be about here. So what are we looking at? I need to put my eyeballs on. 283 meters. 283 meters. Now, bear in mind, we on the M16 range, we qualify at 300 meters, and that's shooting a human size, but just the upper torso of a alleged enemy, whatever. And on the MARF range, they would pop up for about 3 seconds. I was telling Sean, I don't know why, but for some reason, with just iron sights, I could pick off those 300-meter targets all day long. It was like the 200s and the 150s that I was having trouble hitting. But I can clearly see, without any corrective lenses, well enough to knock down half of a human silhouette at 300 meters. So we were just short of 300 meters from, and again, a clear, sunny day, which is pretty unusual in the Coast Range for April. But yeah. So now we know. Now I don't have to guess anymore, and I'll be consistent in my description of the range. But yeah, I wish I had tried this earlier. Well, just sometimes in the moment you don't really think about, you think about your perceived distance, not, going back and look at it. But I'm glad you did. And, we were able to kind of put a question that someone had posed to you to rest and add a little bit more, fact to your sighting, which is pretty cool. That's what we're all about here, the facts, just the facts. Man. Yeah.
And sometimes, too, with a bigger number as far as distance is concerned, if people were interested enough, or if our listeners are interested enough, and you were to actually measure out a distance like that, you do have pretty good visibility. When you say, hey, this thing was 100 yards away, a lot of people knee-jerk and say, well, that's pretty far. But it's actually not. You still can make out quite a bit of detail at 100 yards. So to state that distance in which you had your encounter is still pretty visual. Well, that distance goes.
Jeff, Sergeant Martin, one of the other eyewitnesses. Yeah, you recall I mentioned that we had a team that would get ahead of us at every site before we got there. They would drop off the I-beams that we would blow up, and while we're working on that, they went up the second site and laid out those training mines and that wire obstacle, and so they were always like one jump ahead of us. And so when we were down at the second site where these things were eventually, Jeff was at the third site, and they were digging a hole for our cratering charge, and he said, I could see you guys down there from that road. I could see you guys working there, and I could clearly make out clothing and uniforms at that distance. I'm telling you, what I saw were completely black, if not extremely dark brown. but there's no question they weren't human. I mean, their chests were, their shoulders were enormous. Their chest they were very barrel chested. The neck seemed to be almost non-existent. They had trapezoids that would come almost from the shoulder right to the base of their skulls. The arms was what really got me. Those arms hung extremely long, well below their knees, and I don't believe they were stooped over at all. They did not have a human silhouette. It clearly did not. And again, fact of the matter, our safety protocols wouldn't allow 3 individuals to be separated from the group with what was going on there. And in fact, I dare say that final explosion we did could easily have showered that second site with shrapnel. I don't think anybody in their right mind would be down there, but no, they were checking us out. It was just they wanted to know what we were doing.
So, Todd, you have your sighting. What happened next? When did you decide to report it to somebody, or who did you decide to report it to?
Well, initially, I didn't go public with it. Had no real interest in doing that, but of course, I talked to some very close friends and family, and obviously Jeff about it. I mentioned it to a coworker of mine without being too patronizing. He said, well, you really should talk to about this is Melissa. Well, Melissa was our receptionist. I was a vice president of a shipping company at the time. He said, Melissa lived down at the coast. She was from Tillamook. Surely if she had spent her whole life down there, she would have heard something. So I said, well, you know what, I'll give that a shot. So I went to Melissa, and I very sheepishly said, Melissa, I understand you grew up in Tillamook. She goes, yeah. Why? And I go, I'm just curious, in the time you lived down there, do you ever recall any stories about Bigfoot? And without breaking stride, or I kept waiting for this patronizing laugh or whatever, she looked me square in my eyes and she said, oh, you mean Cape apes? Yeah, all the time. I said, what? She goes, Cape apes, that's what we called them. Because along the Oregon coast, you have these capes that jet out into the ocean, and most of those capes are protected forest land. And it was like if I asked her if she'd ever seen a cow. She was not the least bit taken aback by my question, and was very nonchalant about her answer. She goes, yeah, all the time. And then she starts naming off places around the Tillamook area that have had sightings, and yeah, I was just like floored. It was nothing to her. Eventually, because having this knowledge, it kind of eats at you. You're always asking yourself, why me? I mean, there has to be a purpose, and I had been seeking that purpose, and I know from interviewing dozens of people over the years that it's almost therapeutic for them to find somebody to get that off their chest and to be able to share that and be taken seriously, and so it's kind of funny. One day I was going through the classifieds in the local paper, the Oregonian, and I'm just breezing through the help wanted section. I don't know why, but the word Bigfoot is like standing out in big bold letters, and I'm like, what? And I got to looking at it, and it said, Bigfoot Research Group actively seeking field researchers with, field research experience. Call 1-800-BIGFOOT. So I'm thinking, this is just too rich. I gotta check it out. I called, got a hold of them, and they responded within a few hours and sent me a questionnaire, and I filled it out, got it back to them, and next thing I know, they sent out a researcher. It wasn't Peter the first go-around. It was a guy named Todd Deary, and he drove us into that area. That's the first time I knew they had keys. explored the area a bit, and he was impressed enough that he eventually convinced Peter to come down and meet me and check the area out. And then ultimately, Peter gave me a call and he says, I'm involved in a television show. You may have heard of it, Unsolved Mysteries. He said, we're going to be filming here this week, and I'd wonder if you wanted to be part of the show. And so that was my first public appearance. And that opened up a lot of other doors. I was asked to speak at various conferences and whatnot, and people wanted to work with me. I spoke 4 years, 96, 97, 96 through 99. I spoke. I was honored to be asked to speak at the what they called the SASQUATCH Symposium at the time, and this is where I got to meet Meldrum, DeHinden, Professor Grover Krantz, Dr. Labonte, Chris Murphy, John Kirk III. I mean, it was a who's who in Bigfoot. And I was wondering, okay, what the hell am I doing here with these guys? But apparently they liked what I said, and I was invited back the next 3 subsequent years. And then one thing's led to another. I've done more than a couple dozen TV shows. I've got one in production right now, a documentary. And before this Corona thing came up, I had scheduled to do another. I'm hoping that'll go through. We've got a very active area in Alaska that I want to do a documentary on, and just interviews like with you folks. And but the Conservancy is really predicated on the discovery, research, knowledge, and this is key, the recognition, official taxonomic species identification, and then lastly, and just as importantly, is enacting laws to protect them. Do they need our protection? A lot of people would argue otherwise, but until we have, solid information with regards to their population, the health of their species, what their resources and habitat needs are, I'd rather err on the side of caution. And let's face it, right now it's open season on Bigfoot, simply for the fact that nobody wants to believe it. And that's one thing that we're working with. We have an initiative I've been working with Native Americans and First Nation people of Canada to work with the tribes, specifically on reservations, because they have autonomy there. They get to make the rules. And who knows these things better than them, right? We've been here on the West Coast, and by we, I mean Europeans, less than 300 years. We have archaeological and anthropological evidence showing Native Americans now back about 19,000 years. And even the Native Americans agree that they were here long before they were. In fact, they don't talk about them as an animal at all. They talk about them as a tribe. They call them either the first ones or they call them the old ones, and again indicating that they were here first, and then at least 19,000 years they have had to live symbiotically with these creatures, and they have a lot of information. But my thought is, if we can get the tribes to establish laws against harming or harassing or God forbid killing one, I think it'll spread quickly between different reservations. I think it helps, number one, to add credence to their lore and their history, and at the same time, it give them some authority they already have. But I mean, as far as some authenticity, as far as these creatures are concerned, I think in due time, if we get most of the reservations on board to set up some sort of a protection act for these things, then we can make that transition to the civilian world, the non-native world. It'll be a lot easier. So that's that's one of the directions we're working on.
No, it's a step in the right direction, and I'm glad you guys are taking the initiative to go through that. It's a part only explored by certain investigators. I wouldn't say that looking at it from the native angle is something that's done across the spectrum of research. So I'm glad when anybody has the opportunity to jump in and share their findings and details. It's outside my wheelhouse, not because of ignorance. It's just, location. You're probably a lot closer to some of those tribes and individuals than, I am. Of course, out here in Pennsylvania, you're out there in the Pacific Northwest. But it's still good to read about nonetheless.
It's hard to get them to open up to non-natives in the first place. And whenever I get lucky enough to have one talk about it openly, it's amazing what they have to say. And many of them have had encounters of their own. This last summer, I was taking a cruise in Alaska, just a day cruise out of Seward. There happened to be this party of natives on board, and they it's kind of funny. My friend and fellow researcher Shane Land was with me. We were at the back rail on the top deck of the ship, and there's this old guy sitting there in his chair, and he's looking at Shane, and he's pointing at him, and then pointing at his chest, and then pointing back at him, and Shane's trying to figure out what the heck he's. He thought, he probably wants me to move. I'm in the way of blocking a picture he wants to take. Finally, the guy shakes his head no and motions us over. We come over there. This older gentleman says, "That picture on your sweatshirt." Well, that day, Shane just decided to wear a Bigfoot shirt. He says, that thing on his shirt, he goes, they're real. They do exist. And Shane, having just written a book on the subject in Alaska, he goes, "Oh, yeah, you call them Kutashka." And he goes, "How did you know that?" He goes, "Oh, I do my homework. I studied native culture." And turns out this guy is not just a Native American and not just an elder. He happened to be the chief of a Inupiat tribe. And as soon as we told him what we did, he goes inside the main cabin, and we sat down and talked for well over an hour, getting to know each other and discussing the Bigfoot. And we're great friends to this day. And he's coming on board with our Native Advisory Council, and his name's Chief Kenny Blatchford. Yeah, we still stay in touch. I'm hoping when this virus opens up a little bit that Diane and I can fly up there and spend some time with him.
Wonderful. As
well as hitting this other very active site on the southern coast. But no, when I first came out, I mean, literally the week that I came back from that drill where I had that sighting, I made a beeline to the library, and I don't think I had set foot in a library in 10 years, but I just was compelled to find out what I could learn about these creatures. And I wanted the latest, greatest, newest information, and I checked out 10 books because that was the most they would let you check out. And someday I'll return them, but I kid. But after
that's how I got my first copy of Sasquatch: The Apes Among Us.
Right.
Sorry, Todd.
Still got the little card holder in the front. Yeah. It was about 6 months into it that it just dawned on me, wouldn't it be interesting, rather than trying to find the newest, latest information on this thing, to see how far back you could go in time. So I kind of did a 180 at that point. I knew these things just didn't come into existence 300 years ago when pioneers are coming over. I thought, I've got to find out how far back it goes. And I'll tell you what, I haven't found the end of it yet. But again, with 19,000 plus years of living with these symbiotically like they do have, I'm focused a lot on the native aspect. I think they know a hell of a lot more than we do. And the trick is to get their confidence in you and show respect, and that you want what's best, for these creatures. And to some extent, they almost worship these things. They consider them powerful spirits. They respect them. Trust me.
Todd, that's just great information, and I hope you get more from it. We have to stop the show for tonight, though. Sadly, we're hitting the 1 hour mark, and you and I talked about this was going to happen. Once we hit a note, we're going to keep going. Todd, we want to bring you on for a second part in the near future. Are you game?
Yes, absolutely. I'd be honored.
Because we got a lot to talk about with Todd, guys. It's not going to stop here with one show. Todd, where can folks find you?
If you want to contact me, I would recommend just emailing me direct. My email is American Primate, just one word, American Primate at AOL.com. I'm the other guy that still uses AOL. And otherwise, you can drop me a message on the our Facebook page. That's AmericanPrimate.org. But yeah, I look forward to continuing this conversation. There's a whole lot that has transpired in 27 years, and I look forward to the next 27 years. I've got some projects coming up I'd love to discuss, and some very innovative ideas with regards to some of the phenomena that swirls around these things. Trying to find some physical answers to some of the more paranormal aspects of these things that people attribute to them. So that would be fun to talk about, really. So, yeah, let's do this again. We're
going to set it up, man. This was great. Folks, Todd Neiss, American Primate Conservancy. Vance, where can folks find you?
Well, being that the temperatures have dropped here in the Chicagoland area, they can find me in front of my fireplace. Everybody can find me at Vance A. Nesbitt over on Facebook, or Vance_Nesbitt_NRML on Instagram. And of course, always feel free to reach out. And if you have questions that you would like to ask Todd, you can reach out to me, or you can always get hold of Henry or Sean. So, Henry, where can people reach you at?
They can find me on Henry B. May the 4th on Facebook.
There you go. Folks, I'm Sean Forker. You can find me everywhere. I'm my name at Sean Forker. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere that's social, you can guarantee I'll be there in some way, shape, or form. Find us here at the Sasquatch Experience, SasquatchExperience.com. On Facebook, Sasquatch Experience, or email us, SquatchExperience@gmail.com. Thanks for listening tonight, folks. And remember, Henry, give them that good old catchphrase.
Y'all be good or be good at it.
And it doesn't get much better than that. Good night, everybody. Keep on squatching.